Oh my God, we made it. And somehow it's already February. Somehow it is 2020. For the 3AI second cohort, you survived 4 whole days with us and you're rounding out on day 5, except for Rodolfo, because it makes it only 2. And Eric, who isn't here yet, and Memonat as well. So, I'm incredibly excited that you're all here. I'm incredibly grateful for everyone in the room who is a friend and ally of the Institute, or a sponsor, or a student, or one of our staff members. And I'm incredibly excited that we get to spend the next 2 hours together. We will talk, we will eat. I hope we will make some new friendships and new relationships. I hope there'll be a little bit of insight and knowledge exchanged, and we will get to look out on a Canberra that is not wreathed in smoke and surrounded by fire, and that feels like a good thing too. But before we do all of that, I wanted to welcome Arnie Violet to the stage to do a welcome to country. So please join me in thanking her for that.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here to perform a welcome. I'll put my glasses on, I can't see a thing. So, when I was asked to do the welcome by Andrew, and he wrote me a little bit about what it was going about, and I thought, what the hell is this? I thought you were all teachers. So then I come and I did a bit of research, and you're looking at the future of. Oh, I did a welcome at ANU I call it, when I was a child, and because I grew up in Yass, that's my country as well as around here. It's my mother's country. We used to call it spaceship, is the dome. Because when you'd go past and I was a little girl, and I'd say, I'd love to have a sticky beacon there one of these days to see what's in there. Maybe there's Martians. So I told my granny. So my name is Violet Sheridan. I'm a descendant from Ngunnawal country. I have 4 children and 24 grannies, 2 great-grandchildren, and I'm a kingship carer. I look after my 2 little cousins, 6 and 9. We just come back from holiday, so I need a holiday for my holiday. Done my head in. Let me tell you, trying to keep 2 little kids occupied. So this is my country, and I've told you you are looking at the future of machinery. And I did a welcome, like I said, for ANU for scientists, and that was for super computers. And I thought to myself, I've got to ask this. I was only invited to do the welcome, but I'm a sticky beak also. And I thought, I've got to ask them what these supercomputers are. Because I've got a grandson, he has autism, and he's 14-year-old, and I reckon he should be a scientist. Because I bought him a PlayStation, and I'm trying to read this what's the name, to see if I'll put it together, and I turned around and he's playing it. Oh my goodness, but he's such a smarty. He knows how to get into our phones, our computers, because he's a whiz kiz, I reckon. So I better get on and let you get on what you're supposed to be doing. So I'm a proud Ngunnawal woman. I'm a proud Aboriginal woman, but I'm also a proud Australian. Don't know nothing about cricket, but I follow it, and I'm hoping they don't give poor old Steve Smith a bad time in South Africa. So every time a formal welcome is given, it continues a tradition that has always been a part of Aboriginal culture, except for maybe a lapse of about 200 years. It was always given by way of welcome. It was always given by way of welcome when permission was granted to visit a different tribal area. When we talk about traditional country, we mean something beyond the dictionary definition for the word Aboriginal Australians. We might mean homeland, or tribal or clan area. We might mean more than just a place on the map. For us, country is a word for all values, places, resources, stories, cultural obligations associated with that area and its features. It describes an entity of our ancestors' domains. It is on this land, possibly right here where we meet, that my ancestors cared, lived, learned and raised their families. I'd like to pay my respects to my elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present. I'd also like to acknowledge Genevieve. Thank you for having me along to do the welcome, and I wish you all the success for the future. So when I see something new in computering, I hated science. But you know, when I did been doing welcomes with scientists and over the years now, and particularly ANU, I was thinking, oh bloody hell, oh please, I wish I should have taken notice of my science teacher. But I tried to encourage my grannies to listen, and I've tried to encourage our future generations, because we need to encourage them to take up positions like scientists. I did the welcome for the Prime Minister's Science Awards, and so many women there that received awards was so inspiring. So I'm hoping that our next generation, and they encourage and more, I think more scholarships, because I think that's not many of our young people are going to unis now because of the amount of money that they're being charged. So maybe we should look at more scholarships and encourage more people to take up science. So in keeping the general spirit of friendship and reconciliation, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon on behalf of my people, the Ngunnawal people, who are the tradition owners of the land, and I wish you all the success and a great afternoon. Thank you so much for having me along.
Thank you, Auntie Annie. If it makes you feel any better, I used to think the dome was a spaceship too. And then I realised that it had bits of phar lap inside of it, and I thought that was very odd. For those of you who are not from Australia, that is the heart of a racing horse. So, creepy.
Sorry, this one just got bumped.
Okay, I'm going to let you do whatever you're doing. What are you doing? Dude, we done?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, well then, we're here. We're here. I wanted to do a couple of things to echo Auntie Annie's thoughts and to kind of centre this conversation. I'm always acutely aware, having been in the United States for 30 years, that when I came home, I was coming home, and that I was coming to a place that was very different than America, very different in all kinds of ways. Different in no small part because it is a place that has been continuously occupied for 60 to 80,000 years. A place where Aboriginal people have been making meaning and making life for that amount of time, and a place where that history gets to be both our legacy and our responsibility. And so for me, one of the most powerful things about coming home to Australia was to get to begin every event with a welcome to country, hopefully from one of its traditional elders, and an acknowledgement of country by people like me to say, I acknowledge where we are and where we meet. And so I too would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people on whose traditional lands we meet. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders like Auntie Violet and all of her family and kith and kin, and to all the other Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I want to also honour and respect the other Indigenous people who find themselves in the room with us today, and thank you for being here. And I want to remember that while that sometimes feels like a ritual to those of us in the room, I know for the people who aren't from this country that feels like a very strange thing indeed. And one of the most disruptive things I have done over the last 3 years is to perform that acknowledgement of country in America, where it turns out when you say the names of the local people, it's often the first time anyone's heard those names said out loud. So while we may think about it as a ritual here, it's actually a really powerful thing. And it's tempting to think it is just a ritual about the past, but for me it's also about the present and the future. And it's also about every conversation we have about building the future is to do so acutely aware that we build it in a place where people have been building the future for that 60 to 80,000 year cycle. 14 months ago, I was lucky enough to go up to Bawarrina with my mother, the original Distinguished Professor Bell, who I know is somewhere in the room right now, with the original Distinguished Professor Bell, and we went up to see the fish weirs on the Barwon River. Those fish weirs were built, according to archaeologists, about 40,000 years ago. They extend over 1 kilometre along the Barwon River, and they change the volume of the water, the speed of the water, and its direction over this kilometre section. There's 9 weirs or 12, depending on how you see it. They were designed to create cool, deep pools in which you could keep fish alive and swimming so that you could feed all the people that would gather there at various moments in time, because that river is a meeting place, much like Canberra was. That set of weirs was built, well, a very long time ago, but was last used in the 1930s. So a technical system, 40,000 years in use, 40,000 years in which it suggests an acute awareness of landscape and water and the way water moves and the way the environment moves and how you might need to live with and through and in that. every time I think about what it means to talk about the future, I think about the fact that I'm doing it in a place where people have been doing that work for 40,000 years and doing it with a balance that I don't think we've necessarily achieved in the last 200. So when I want to say I pay my respects to the country on which we meet and its people, I also want to remember that's not a past respect, that's a present, enduring and future one too. And I think every one of us in the room has a responsibility to tell that story. That also means for me acknowledging that this was country that was never ceded, and this is country that was never given up. This was country that has always been lived in, and that piece of it's important for me too. That also means that when we think about welcoming and acknowledgements of country and an acknowledgement on my part, it also means acknowledging all the people that are in the room. So in this particular instance, this is the Institute, but it is also the friends and family of the Institute. As I said, my mother is here, and I certainly wouldn't have gotten to this moment in my life without all of her help and support and her living example. There's also other members of my extended family here. I'm really happy for a wonderful moment in time to have my friends from Intel who are here. So yay, there's Intel in the house. It's one of my other lives. Microsoft is here and KPMG is here. There are members of the Swiss Embassy. We thank you for your diplomatic engagement with us here unexpectedly. There are people from KPMG. There are people from CBA, one of my many other roles and responsibilities. And then, of course, there are all of our students and staff. And that's the most amazing bit, right? And I think for me, the most amazing bit about all of that is they're all actually here. I wasn't sure we were going to get to February 2020. For those of you who've been in Australia for the last 6 months, that felt like February might have been an eternity away. It has been an extraordinarily complicated summer. It has been a summer that was a continuation of a protracted drought. It's been a summer of fires and of smoke and hail and floods, the kind of things Australia does mythologically at scale. But it's also been a summer that should have made all of us aware that those were events that felt unprecedented. I know that's a political word, I don't mean it as such, but they felt unprecedented. It's also a moment in time that reminds me of two other things. One of them is an American writer named William Gibson. Many of you have heard me talk about Gibson before. Gibson's the man who coined the phrase, basically, well, cyber. Anything to do with cyber culture is a Gibson thing. In 2003, Gibson was asked to describe the future, and I'm sure the journalist who was interviewing hoped that he was going to give them this excellent picture of the future that had blinky lights and like tech. And what Gibson said instead was that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I've always thought that's a remarkably provocative thought, because what it means is that the future's not some destination that we should be driving towards. The future's already around us if you know how to look for it. And it was particularly striking over the last 6 to 8 weeks to think that if this was the future and we were in it already, that Australia was everyone else's future. That the summer we had, a summer of fires and particulate counts and air purifiers, was a summer that was going to be everyone else's future if we didn't find a different way of thinking about it. It was certainly true every time I was outside of Australia in the last 8 weeks. Everyone asked me how things were here, and what they desperately wanted to be was reassured that there was something on the other side of it. And I didn't always know how to give that reassurance because it wasn't clear there was another side of it. What it felt like instead was that we were in a moment of a distributed future that was already here, a future where we were desperately out of whack with the environment around us, and a future where infrastructures on which we were making decisions were no longer as stable as they seemed. Whether that meant electricity, not a given, telecommunications, not a given, water, not a given, roads, not a given. All of those things turn out to be important if you want mobile apps to work out where you're going to be and where the fire near you might be, or where the rain might come from. A little bit complicated when all of those infrastructures appeared far more brittle than they had been. By the same contrast, the social infrastructures in Australia appeared far more robust. Whether it was about our volunteer fire service, whether it was about a whole series of individual human beings in individual places making incredibly brave acts to ensure the continuities of their families and their communities and of the habitat around them. We had this really weird contrast of brittle physical infrastructures and robust social infrastructures. And for me, that contrast is a hugely important one. And in thinking about the work that we do here at the Institute and the work that I think we keep having to do, for me, that backdrop is how 2020 commenced. For our students who've turned up this week, their arrival was delayed by a week because, well, there were things we couldn't do. We couldn't get into our building. And then when we did get into our building, hail fell on the roof. And whilst our building was fine, they could not say the same about other buildings. And so even for our students, for whom I hope this is an amazing thing, the contrast of where you turn up is a place that has had a hard couple of months. And so the future we are building, in some ways I think we've just seen a vision of it. And I don't know about the rest of you, but that's not a future I wish on anyone else. And I certainly don't wish it on us again. And so I think there are a whole lot of things we need to be doing collectively, individually, at national and international levels to prevent that. Now, that's a big ask. And one of the debates I routinely have with my colleagues here in Australia and overseas is when everything feels really big like that, it's hard to know what the thing you can do as an individual is. It's hard to know what your action can drive and what changes you can make. And I only know one way through that, which is the way I was raised with and the way I have spent 20 years being socialised to at Intel, which is if you want a future different than the one you find yourself in, you actually have to build it. You can't wait for someone else to do it, you actually have to build it. And so that's what we set about doing here at the Institute. The short précis, for those of you who are new, in September of 2018, the university established its first Innovation Institute, flagship of a new strategic set of initiatives that were designed to create places where new kinds of knowledge could be generated, new sorts of relationships and engagement models could be pioneered, and new ways of making universities relevant to the public could be tested. In the room, you have all the founding members of that first initiative. 2.5 years ago, I didn't know what to call the Institute. That made the Vice Chancellor very grumpy. He wanted a sexy name, and I just kept coming up with questions. He's like, those are not good names. We ended up calling ourselves the Autonomy, Agency and Assurance Institute, which he hated because he could never remember them in order or in total. And we just became the 3A Institute because that was easier. And sometimes now the 3AI, which is even easier still. We're becoming our own acronym, for which I feel very pleased. Part of what that was about, though, was one single impulse for me, which was that I looked at the world I had spent 20 years building in Silicon Valley, and I looked at the world that was coming, and I thought, I don't think that's the right answer. And so the reason for establishing something here and establishing something at the ANU was the opportunity to build something different, was the opportunity to build something that could scale and that might matter and that might create a different kind of future. And when Brian and I were talking about what it would be like to build something here, I said to him, I think I want to build a new applied science. And he went, that's nice. And I called him back 2 days later and went, okay, so you know what I've said to you, right? He says, well, it sounds very ambitious, but I'm sure you'll be fine. I'm like, okay. Well, then I need some money in a building. He's like, yeah, I'll give you a very small amount of money in a room. I'm like, okay. Eventually you're going to give me a lot of money in a building. So 2.5 years in, we have a floor of a building and more money. We have a new building opening up in 18 months' time, so we got there, just took a little longer than it should have. So the impulse of the Institute in some ways remains the same, right, which is how do we actively find ways of building a different kind of future? And that may sound abstract, but for me and for my staff and our students, I think that is not an abstract thing, that is a daily lived reality. And the thing that we are trying to build is a way of approaching the technical systems that are coming. So anti-violence, science and computers are going to come together, right? The artificial intelligence of the last 10 years will find its way into buildings like this, into the public transportation systems that got you here, into the parking meters that you fed your money into the gates that you flew through when you came into this country, into the electrical grid that will deliver electricity here. All of those things are going to have components of artificial intelligence systems in them. And it would be my contention that we do not yet have the right skills or language or even mental model for thinking about what that will look like. And that it shouldn't just be the work of computer scientists and engineers, it should be the work of some new kind of people to do that. And so when we established the Institute, it was one simple guiding rule, that we were going to build a new applied science to take artificial intelligence safely to scale. 2 years later, I have to say we've probably changed that language just a little bit. I realized it wasn't applied science in general. It was a branch of engineering in specific. And I realised safely wasn't enough, that really we needed to talk about safely, responsibly and sustainably to scale. So stay tuned as that keeps evolving. The nice thing about the work we're doing here is that it gets to be at least an adaptation, if not an evolution. So each generation is different and we get to be responsive to what's going on around us. That was part of the virtue of having an innovation institute. But you never do those things without a backstory, right, and without a history. And for me, we're trying to thread the needle between, I think, two very different things. So one of the early founders of systems and control theory, which would become both cybernetics and systems engineering, is a man named Norbert Wiener. Norbert was a protege, he was a mathematician, he was kind of bonkers. He spent most of his working life at MIT, he made a lot of robots, he drove all of his colleagues absolutely insane, and he was apparently an absolutely awful person to have come to conferences. His way of engaging in a conference was to come down the left-hand side of the auditorium in which he was speaking, stand right there in front of the speaker for 5 minutes, motionless. If he thought you were any good, he would sit in the front row. If he didn't, he would march out of the auditorium up the right-hand side. He did that for 30 years. He wondered why people thought he was possibly unfriendly. In 1950, however, Norbert, on the back end of his career in some ways, understood that it wasn't just about making theory, it was about making people, and it was about making thinkers. And so in 1950, he did something kind of extraordinary for a scientist. He staged a play. He took over a theatre at MIT. He convinced the MIT theatre group that they should put on a play. And he stood up before the play and showed off his latest robot. And of course, took, I suspect, the delight in doing a new prologue to the play, the Norbert Wiener prologue to the play. Now, the play is an important one. It was written 100 years ago this year, actually. The play is called Rossum's Universal Robots. It's the first play in which the word robot appears. It is, in fact, the play that coined the term the robot. It is a play that went on to be the first piece of science fiction ever to be broadcast on television or on the radio. It's a play that appeared on Broadway and the West End. It appeared in Tokyo and in the Playbox Theatre in Sydney. It's a play that changed the way people thought about technology. And it's a play that very much set in mind this notion that we were going to create a new kind of scientific object, for the playwright, a robot, but we were going to tell a different set of stories about what the future looked like and about the people that would make it. The play would be in some ways achingly familiar to all of us. It is basically Blade Runner, but as a parlor drama. So imagine less Harrison Ford, more hysteria. Not my thing, but it's kind of spectacular. Anyway, Norbert stood up in front of the opening of this play, and he declared that the world that was coming was different than the world that had been, and that the reason he wanted to perform this play was it was a play that has a moral point of view, right, that basically says one of the challenges when humans make technical systems that are robots, you have to think about the ethics of it, the morality of it, you have to think about what those robots are going to do, and if you don't think really carefully about it, the robots will get cross with you, and nothing good will come of it. So at the beginning, he says, if you want to imagine that world, we're going to have to imagine different kinds of people. And he thought it was binary. He said either the engineers are going to have to become poets, or the poets are going to have to become engineers. He imagined that it would be this simple thing, which is basically convert the social scientists to scientists, or the scientists to social scientists, and then we're done. And interestingly, he didn't actually have an opinion as to which way it went. Wonderfully, Norbert was kind of, it could go either way. He just knew that it had to be different than it was. I don't think it's that simple. In 1950, maybe it was that simple. I think in 2020, it is infinitely more complicated than suggesting that the robots should become, the engineers should become poets or the poets should become engineers. I look instead to someone who Norbert spent a lot of time talking to in this same time period, an anthropologist by the name of Margaret Mead. Some of you will know Margaret Mead. She is a complicated character. She had a lifelong beyond academic anthropology. She wrote a column in the American equivalent of New Idea, well, actually more like the American equivalent of Women's Weekly, a magazine called Red Book. And every month she had a column where she talked about social issues from an anthropological point of view. She is the first person to coin the term the generation gap. She was the first person to write in a positive manner about homosexuality back in the 1950s in the pages of Red Book. She was also someone who worked at and across the intersections of anthropology and many other disciplines. And she and Norbert spent a bit of time together palling around in the 1940s and early 1950s because they organised a conference together. a conference that gave birth to what would ultimately be artificial intelligence, but what in the 1940s and 50s they called cybernetics. And when Mead was interviewed about that conference much later in her life in the 1970s by Stuart Brand, for those of you keeping track, so Stuart Brand of The Well, How Buildings Learn, and also the cameraman holding the camera at the mother of all demos. Stuart, anyway, big fan of Mead's, came to interview her in the mid-1970s with her husband, or then ex-husband, Gregory Bateson. And she was reflecting on the conversation she'd had with Norbert back in the 1940s and 1950s. And she said about that moment that there were three groups of people at that conference. There were the mathematicians and physicists. Shout out to my second-year physicist in the room at the ANU. Well done, both, oh, more than one. Physicists everywhere. There's a whole collection of you right there. And I'm sorry for Mead's description of you. People trained in the physical sciences who were very, very precise about what they wanted to think about. Those of us who've ever known physicists and mathematicians know this to be true. Very precise about what they think about. Then there were a small group of anthropologists and psychiatrists who were trained to know enough about psychology in groups that we knew what was happening and how to use it and disallow it. So Mead's basically saying we knew they wanted to be precise and we were going to stop them. And then she says, and then there were this third group of these 2 or 3 gossips in the middle who were simple people with a lot of loose intuition and no discipline as to what they were doing. She says, in that sense, it was the most interesting conference I've ever been to because no one knew how to manage what was going on there. No one knew how to make sense of it. So you've got Norbert who says the engineers will have to become poets or the poets will have to become engineers. And you've got Mead saying, no, actually, you need the poets and the engineers and then the people who will sit in the middle with loose intuition. And then you need not to try and make sense of it too quickly. That what, in fact, you need to do is let that conversation unfold in all of its messiness and all of its chaos. And if there is one way I think about how you might build a new branch of engineering, it isn't about shoehorning one discipline into another discipline. It's not about turning someone into something else. It's about creating the space to have the most interesting conversation you will ever get to have with people who have completely different preoccupations and completely different intentionalities and completely different ways of expressing things, and of desperately trying to work through how to do that. And I'm under no illusions, right? Mead could say that 40 years after the fact, or 30 years after the fact. At the time of that conference, everyone was really irritated, all the time, because there were all these conversations going on and no one could work out what was being talked about. And half of the conversation was going on in one discipline and the other half was going on somewhere else. And it was the work of people like Margaret and Norbert to try and create the room where those conversations could happen and something else could get born. What rose out of those conversations was the work that would become artificial intelligence 6 years later at Dartmouth. What it gave birth to was a technical agenda that we've been pursuing ever since. So when I think about what we're trying to do here, it's those two thoughts that I keep in my head, that it oughtn't be about turning someone into something they shouldn't be, but it should be about how you create the room for remarkable and interesting conversations that no one knew how to manage. And I think that's a good thing, letting just a little bit of the chaos and the mess survive. So that's what we're doing. In a more concrete sense, for those of you who thought that was overly philosophical and deeply unhelpful, we're doing 3 things. This is my Intel training. Look, I can give you all of that preamble with 3 things. We're doing 3 things. Because how do you build a new branch of engineering, right? Well, I think you do it 3 ways. I think you teach it into existence, iteratively. There's no point waiting for a curriculum to be perfect for a thing that doesn't exist yet. The only way it's going to happen is by testing it and trying it again. Educational experiment, year 1, happened last year and is still mostly in the room. Yay! Educational experiment number 2 kicked off, well, officially starts on Monday, but kicked off this preceding Monday. And it will be different in some ways than the last, and some things are the same, and it will be a different kind of chaos. We are commencing a PhD program starting in the second half of the year. We are continuing to do the work that I think is as important as the university teaching, which is taking what we know out into the broader community. So how do we share that work in other places? So step 1 of building a new branch of engineering, teach it into existence. Step 2, all of these done truthfully in parallel, not consecutively, is find people who already are building these next generation systems and work out what their problems are or what their successes are. So go and spend time in the places that people are already encountering next generation cyber-physical systems. So study it into existence. And then number 3, is theorize it into existence. Work out what are the big questions, what are the things that are going to be the pieces that every practitioner will need to know, the questions that are raised every time you see one of these systems at work, the big underlying messy pieces that don't need to be tidied up exactly but need to be examined. So, doing all of that's kind of a lot of work. Good news is, since September 2018, when it was just me, we have accumulated many, many people, and many people have joined us since. Some of you were lucky enough to be with us this time last year when we kicked off Education Experiment number 1. Since Educational Experiment number 1, a number of new people have joined the Institute. So, not counting students, will any of the new staff of the Institute who arrived since last January stand up? Yes, I'm looking at you, Johannes. You don't even up, yay! Exactly. And that is a remarkable collection of talent you have just seen there. They come from all points of the globe, they come from many different practices, they come from many different places and spaces. And at least 2 of those people standing up, sadly for me, will leave us this year to go to graduate school. So, Katrina, I'm going to do it to you again. This is my shout out to Katrina Ashton and Harry Dalton, who have been remarkable research assistants at the Institute for the last year and who are both bound to graduate school, and of whom I could not be prouder and who I could not be more pleased, and for whom I'm waiting to see what happens, and you will always have a home with us. That's what you need to know. This will always be a home, because you guys are amazing. So that is a happy thing. I'm also happy to say that in addition to all of that, one of the people that stood up is someone that I have known for 15 years now, is that right? I think it's 15 years. We have worked together on projects, we have done field work together, we have created chaos together, we have created chaos independently of one another, all of which is good. I managed to convince Alex that she should come to Australia. I didn't tell her it would catch on fire right after she got here. I might have neglected to tell her that her children would need covered-toed shoes at school because snakes were a thing in schoolyards. I probably neglected to tell her it was going to be really, really cold in the winter and then really, really hot in the summer. I forget what I did tell her. Oh yeah, birds, lots of birds. We have lots of birds, they're lovely. Very loud, you're going to really like them. Yeah, also I said that Canberra was like Cleveland, a thing for which she will never forgive me and any American in the room will understand. Nonetheless, I'm happy to make semi-official today that Alex will be assuming a role as the Deputy Director of the Institute. That means, exactly. That means she'll be, responsible for a whole series of things, and I won't be, which makes me very happy, and I probably shouldn't be so gleeful about that. And I wanted to transition just a little bit here because I think one of the things that's important for me is that you get to see just the range of what's in the Institute, because it's never been just me and I never wanted it to be. One of the things that I have been clear about since the very day the Institute started, at that very first talk I gave, was that it is tempting when you've been in Silicon Valley for a long time to believe the Joseph Campbell hero's journey story, that it's a lone inventor. And the reality is it's never a lone inventor. It's always a whole collection of people, and it's a whole collection of aspirations and desires and biographies and preoccupations and people who are willing to help. And sitting in this room are a whole lot of people who've been willing to help in almost every way I can think of. And so the great delight for me is that you get to see some of those people and hear from them now. So let me welcome to the stage Professor Alexander Safiroglu.
Thank you all. I'm delighted to be here in Australia for the past 6 months and at the 3A Institute for the past 6 months. It hasn't been quite as shocking as Genevieve may have made it out. I'm delighted to be here. I've come from a long career in tech in the US, where I worked in and led multidisciplinary teams that were developing new products, particularly around the Internet of Things. So think about things like smart homes and smart manufacturing, intelligent transportation systems, autonomous vehicles, but also think of those things as objects that are just the tip of the iceberg of large cyber-physical systems and all of the types of data and technology and hardware and software and systems and people that go behind them. So I come to this role having a a product background, but always thinking about cyber-physical systems. And in those types of roles that I had in industry, I was always the glue between various types of experts and various types of teams. So my own training is in cultural anthropology. So I have a research background, but I worked with people in engineering and computer science and product development teams, in marketing, in corporate governance, et cetera. And it was my job to kind of bring them all together to be the glue, which is why my name is so great, Zafira Glue, in case you ever want to know how to pronounce it. And I'm doing a similar role here as deputy director, that I have my hands in lots of different work that we're doing at the Institute, and I'm the glue that holds some of that together. And I want to go a little bit into more detail about some of those things now, in particular, some of the research work that Genevieve mentioned, as well as the educational offerings that we have beyond the master's program, including micro-credentials and work that we do directly with the public. I'd like to talk a little bit about the 2019 cohort that is now off doing their capstones or just come back from doing capstone placements, and our PhD program. But most importantly, before I talk about all of those things, I want to pause and to say thank you so much to all of our sponsors for the 2019 program. Without KPMG, Macquarie, and Microsoft, we wouldn't have been able to fund our master's students for this year. And it's fair to say that we wouldn't be here today at all without you. And I'm very excited to be continuing work with each of them. And we are so happy to have here today James Mabbitt from KPMG and Rachel Bondi from Microsoft. And I would love to have you each come up and tell us a little bit about the work that's going to be going on this year with 3AI. So James, would you like to start? Does James have
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. And I'd just like to start by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land, the Ngunnawal people and Ngamberi people. And thank you to Auntie Violet as well for that welcome to country. It's interesting, as part of this journey with the 3A Institute, there's a couple of things that have been front of mind through it the whole time for us as a firm. And one of those has been questions of trust. And what does that mean when you talk about cyber-physical systems? And over the course of the last year, we've crystallised around some things for us as a firm and looking at the elements of integrity, ability and humanity and what that means in the context of trust and cyber-physical systems. And through the work we've been involved with the 3A Institute, some of the work early last year around the forum into AI and ethics in Sydney, some of the work we did in Canberra around that as well. We involved government, stakeholders, institutions. We had high school students participate. We had members of our firm. We had our clients involved in those activities. And really, one of the things we learnt through that, and it was something that Genevieve mentioned in her opening, was the value of questions and how do you ask the right questions. And through some of the workshops we've been involved with the students in at the 3A Institute as well, we've seen the value of that and how by asking the right types of questions you begin to get to the heart of some of the matters that you're actually trying to deal with and how you can make sense of those. The other thing that Genevieve mentioned was family, and for me as well, this has been a very personal relationship being a graduate of ANU. I hide my science degree. I did do science at ANU. I also did arts as well. And but also because as an employer, it's personal in the sense that when we look at our young people coming through the firm, the graduates who joined us, we had 300, actually 600 new graduates start this week. You think about the technology and the systems that they're going to be working with and the skill sets and capabilities that those people need. And it's really activities like the Innovation Institute at ANU who are actually thinking about the future of what that needs to look like practically. And that is one of the beautiful things about the work that's being done here. The other bit, from a personal perspective, is as a father, I've got 2 young children, and I'd like to think that they would be inspired to go on and participate in learning activity with institutes like this and themselves graduate through that, because you can see the value of this deep systems thinking, trying to think about how things come together and their connectivity in the world and how that actually creates new opportunity. And that word balance, how do you do it in a safe way, in a responsible way, and do things that are sustainable, I think is just so important. Then there were things like the Ada Lovelace event, Ada, outstanding. You hear so much about the history of technology and where things have come from, and then there are stories that you never really hear or get exposed to. And again, that is something beautiful that the Institute has done, is to expose me to things like that. And then finally, I guess, looking forwards and some of the things we've already started to do together, we've been very lucky to have Olivia Reeves work with us on her capstone. We had members of the 3A Institute come and participate in a piece of work we did in the firm, looking at 20 predictions for 20 years' time, and Olivia's continuing to work on that piece with us, as well as some work around the future of space that is beginning to bring together thinkers from places like NASA and Blue Origin and SpaceX. And I think it is through relationships like this, actually, that you've made us a little bit braver and pushed us a little bit further in terms of the way in which we think about the world, and trying to have a position and a voice too in terms of the things that we're looking to achieve and do. So, finally, I guess just to say thank you for being a part of that journey so far, and we're really looking forwards to what that next iteration looks like for us. It's been fantastic. So, thank you.
Thanks, James. It's always challenging to present after Genevieve and James because of their fields. So I thought I'd take a risk and not do any slides, PowerPoint slides. And that's a big deal if you work at Microsoft, because we tend to want to rely on a lot of slides. So I've opted for no slides, but a few things that I'd like to say. 18 months ago, Microsoft and 3AI entered into this partnership together. We don't think about it as helping. We actually think about this as being collaborating together on really important issues that face us here in Australia as well as around the world. And I think it's always been this responsibility that we have to human-centric design in our technology that's really important to us. And you're probably wondering, well, what's Microsoft doing here? Some of you, and I'm still convincing my kids this, that we're not about, our first founder, Bill Gates, was all about putting a PC on every desktop and in every home. I don't know if you remember that. And I've been on that journey because I've been with Microsoft for 20 years, and we don't stand for that anymore. Even though my own kids are kind of still a little confused as to PC, Mac, it's all very confusing at home sometimes. But we're much more than that now. We mean, what our mission is as a company is really to empower people and organisations to achieve more. We're a platform. We believe in our technology and our social purpose to really help support partnerships like this, to really do different things and make a difference in the world. And I want everybody to know that we're here together solving world problems, and I couldn't be more excited than that. I had the opportunity yesterday to go to the Bureau of Meteorology up in Queensland to sit down with their CEO, Andrew Johnson, and on reflecting on some of the things that Genevieve talked about as to what's been happening. If you think about an organisation that's been around for 100 years, to think of what they have faced in the last 100 days has been incredible. And without giving out too many of their trade secrets, I always thought about them as their app or going to their website to find out what was happening. But they do so much more than that. And it made me appreciate the phone calls that they got from Tennis Australia, from very famous, I will not mention, tennis players to say, forecast so the roof doesn't close. To the other edge of the spectrum, which is their data, which was accurate in predicting where fires were going and where they weren't. But people never left their towns because social media said it was okay, yet the data said it wasn't. So to think about facing those particular issues, and it was amazing for him to share with us what that team has been doing. It's not just about the tech. It's as much about culture, it's about people, and then how does technology and policy all sort of fit together as well. So I was really struck by, and that's why I think Microsoft's here. We obviously work with a lot of companies like Bureau of Meteorology, We work with a lot of other large banking institutions. And I think why this is so important to us is we get to bring the thinking, the collective thinking, not one type of thinking, but a group of thinking together and bringing to some of these customers the best of the possible minds that we can bring. So that's a little bit about why we're here. But I also wanted to welcome the new cohort. I do love all my children equally, I will say, but it's about you today. This is your first week. Well, I think it's your pre-week. And I have 2 kids. I have a younger and an older. And I was wondering, what should I say to the second year cohort? I want to acknowledge the first year cohort's still very dear to my heart. I got to speak last year. I will say the setup this year is a lot different to last year. I remember squishing behind the desk of Genevieve's and we were all like pinned in. So year 2, you have definitely seen a step up in the opening event this week. But I talked to my daughter Phoebe about this because she's 9 and she is the second. And I keep on telling her that she's special for very different reasons. And there were 3 things that I always tell Phoebe as a second. And I hope this resonates with the year 2 cohort. First of all, I think you all have an edge. You can watch the first year, see what they've done, build upon what they've done. I know Phoebe really looks at her sister all the time as to the edge that she can have. You are inherently cool. You know, the family that you have around you, the family, knows a little bit about what to expect, and you can definitely push them in different ways that I think are different and interesting for the second year. And then you're definitely wise. You're definitely going to learn a lot from your first year group and understand exactly what you want to do. And I think there's a lot you have in front of you that can build on the success of the first group into the year ahead. And I know that the first group is still here doing incredible work, and I'm so thankful for all the things that you've done. And then last but not least, I'd like to thank the ANU 3AI, Genevieve, and the whole entire faculty and staff. It's not, I love Genevieve, but the faculty is incredible. And the staff that surrounds you and the talent that we have here is just phenomenal. So a personal thank you to you. You guys make this what it is, and we couldn't be more prouder to be with you all again for the year ahead, Microsoft, KPMG, and 3AI. So thank you so much.
Thank you both so much for that. As I promised, I am going to tell you a little bit about the research that is happening at the 3A Institute. I wanted to quickly share 4 ongoing projects and to demonstrate that we work across a whole range of sectors and social needs. So this first project is one that we're doing with the Australian Institute for Marine Sciences, or AIMS. They have been collecting data on the Great Barrier Reef for over 40 years. Which makes it one of the longest standing research programs in Australia. And over the past 2 years, we have been working with them to explore and implement the next generation of cyber-physical systems they are employing, specifically around underwater autonomous image capture technology. I have to say that slowly so you capture all of it. So imagine drones that are capturing visual data and other data underwater, as well as a large digital twin and all of the problems that go along with creating such a digital twin and with creating drones that can work in water in the middle of the night, in the middle of stormy seas, and to capture data in a less biased way than their old methods, which included throwing graduate students off the back of a boat with a camera and some scuba gear, which only works, it turns out, during the day and in calm weather. And here we're really thinking about what does it mean to build a digital twin? What are some of the challenges with creating those types of underwater drones? My second example of a research project that we're doing is around mining and the mining sector. We have been working with a company that has one of the largest fleet of commercially operating autonomous vehicles in the world. Australia leads the world in the deployment of autonomous vehicles, particularly in mining. And we've had a number of trips to the Pilbara And we currently have a 2019 student who is completing a capstone project there, and I see him at the back of the room, so maybe you can catch up with him later and learn more about that. In particular, with the mining and the autonomous systems, we're interested in how automation changes workforce training and how people are prepared to work in autonomous environments. And in particular, we're exploring questions around how humans are ongoing critical actors in managing and enabling autonomous systems. So it's not just like, we made the trucks run themselves, they're gonna go off and do their thing, we don't need any humans involved anymore. There's an incredible amount of very diverse work that happens in tandem with those vehicles to make them work, and we're exploring that. Third project I'll tell you about quickly has to do with work that we're doing with the banking system and looking at banking as a cyber-physical system and how nascent artificial intelligence engines are enabling a range of financial services and how those will go to scale in the next 10 years. So we're interested in questions about what does a system that works with a continuous stream of data making business decisions in an automated way look like in 2020, and what's that gonna look like in 2030? Now, of course, we're interested also because the Australian government is looking at the same issue and has developed AI ethics principles, which a number of businesses and financial institutions are piloting. So we are exploring how those ethics principles can be operationalized. So not just abstract principles, but what does that mean in the work that happens in financial institutions? And how do you think about ethics more broadly than just the data and the algorithms? And then my final example of research that we're doing is work that we are doing looking at how the German government has prepared for and responded to the coming of Industry 4.0 and the types of funding and intellectual work and frameworks they've put in to get AI in a wide range of industries across Germany. The German government has invested $4 billion in 2014 against 2020 targets to upscale industrial sector, and they are thinking proactively about regulatory frameworks, both proactively and as things are unfolding, how they respond in real time to the types of problems that come into existence when these cyber-physical systems are up and running. They are generating quite a few white papers and sets of recommendations and early test cases in law, and that we're very interested in this, in particular because it shows a very strong model of civic engagement with EU and German citizens and provides a example for what could be happening in Australia. So that type of research, Genevieve mentioned going out in the world and seeing people who are doing it now and what we can learn from that, is one thread of what we do. Another thread is thinking about education beyond just the macro credentials that we do, so beyond just the master's program and the PhD program that we are ramping up. We know that we can't wait for the next generation of people to come out and become practitioners. We need to engage with people that are working in the field or in various fields now. We have a robust micro-credentialing program where we work with data scientists and computer scientists, engineers, marketing folks, product folks in a range of industries to get everyone comfortable with what we mean by cyber-physical systems, what are the types of questions they should be asking as they're building out their products. And we're really thinking about how do we take the education and the training that we're developing within the university and take it out to today's practitioners. We are developing half-day, day-long, and multi-session workshops, and we are expanding our suite of offerings this year in micro-credentials based on what we know, based on our research and other work, to be important questions, as well as feedback from people who have already taken some of the workshops and some of our partners. So both leading the way and being responsive to what we know are gaps in the micro-credentialing. And finally, as Genevieve mentioned, it's not enough for us to do work at a university or to do work with selected partners or people working in these systems. We need to engage the entire public, and we do that in a number of ways. We are Australia's national university, and it is our job to bring everybody into the conversation, and we've done that in a variety of ways, including the ADA performance last year, which I missed, but maybe it'll come back around at some point, probably not. But we are continuing to engage in things like podcasting. We're looking at experimenting with that medium this year. We'll be publishing our student reading lists for the course this year. The first one will come out on March 6th, so stay tuned for that on social media. We'll also be holding other big events like the ADA show, but different. We'll be bringing another show from the UK this year. It's called the Big Data Show, and it's about cyber resilience and digital citizenship. That will be later, the back half of this year. And there is a big event happening on March 2nd, April 2nd. Which 2nd? April 2nd. March 2nd will be very soon, April 2nd. My notes say, and the 2nd, which isn't all that helpful, on April 2nd, and Genevieve's going to make an announcement about that at the end. All I will say is that you should remember that Genevieve mentioned that it's the 100th anniversary of the play in which the word robot was coined. So please make sure that you're on our mailing list, and you'll get an invitation to that. Finally, I want to talk just a little bit about our ongoing master's program and the PhD program that we're standing up starting in July. As I mentioned, our staff, Genevieve mentioned, our staff and our colleagues are all growing. Our master's students from this year are becoming formal alumni of the Institute and will have an ongoing relationship with us. You can't get rid of us that quickly. And our 2019 students are applying their skills in capstone placements. They are in organizations such as Telstra, Questacon, the Royal Shakespeare Company, FMG, Threat Casting at Arizona State University, KPMG, and various AI startups, as well as exploring their own research questions into things like Indigenous language voice assistants, the future workforce, workplaces, education, and training. We will have 5 PhD students joining us from the 2019 cohort. We'll be running the PhD program starting in the second half of this year, a little bit differently to how PhD programs have traditionally been run in the College of Engineering and Computer Science. We're going to be drawing on our experience of training in US universities and on our cohort approach to the master's program. So it would be a cohort PhD program. Now I'd like to hand over to Catherine, who's going to tell you about the 2020 Masters and introduce you to our new students. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex, and hello everyone. My name's Catherine Daniel. I'm the research lead here at the 3A Institute, and I would also like to thank Auntie Violet for that lovely welcome to country, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and future on the lands on which we meet. This is a really important acknowledgement and something that we do a lot in the Institute because we really believe that you are here on this country to learn and be a part of what is going on. And so our students last year and this year were also welcomed onto country earlier this week. And we like to acknowledge that, as Genevieve said, this is a place where technologies have been built for millennia, and that there are practices and knowledges that we need to respect, understand, and work in really close contact with our Indigenous peoples. We're really pleased this year also to be able to welcome our first Indigenous student, and this is a really proud moment for us, and we're looking forward with the rest of the cohort to learning a huge amount more from our Indigenous people. What I wanted to do in a second is just to show how things are changing in 2020. Last year, we had mainly Australian students. We had one student from the US. This year, we're going global. Prototype 2 is something a little bit different. And so we're really excited to welcome people from all over the world and almost all continents to this program here. And I think As Genevieve's already talked about and many of you have explained, we have a really strong value around diversity. And so this cohort represents a huge range of different lived experiences, cultural backgrounds, skills, gender types, age range, and that for us is really important as we need to build the future with a whole diverse range of people. We're also really happy that our cohort this year is 50% male. That is actually very rare in computing and engineering courses across Australia and the world, and that even more interestingly, 50% of our entire applicant pool were women. So it's not just that we've chosen the women, there were lots of women who came. And that for us is really important. I'm also really pleased to have our 2019 cohort back here. Today is the meeting of the two cohorts, and we're so pleased that you've made it through this program and will continue to be a really important part of the 3AI family going into the future. As Alex mentioned, a number of you will be going on to do PhDs, others will remain as employees for a short while before you make your way out into the world as the first practitioners of this new applied science. So thank you all for coming back. Last year, this was a bit of a secret. We didn't really know what the program was going to be because we hadn't really built it yet. This year, we can share a little bit more about, about what the students went through last year and what our students this year are going to go through. There are two major threads to our prototype. The first one is around a lab course that all of our 2019 students did. Now, this year, we're calling it Building Cyber-Physical Systems as there is a cultural context to the word lab, and we're seeing whether we can disrupt that. So stay tuned for whether that makes a difference. We also have, and in this particular thread in the build course, the idea is not just to think about software and hardware. Of course, we will be developing skills in that, but it's really for all of the practitioners here to learn and empathise and to develop transdisciplinary practice around how we design, build and decommission cyber-physical systems. The second thread that you can see on the inside and that Genevieve's already talked about in some depth is that one of the really important things of this program is for people to move beyond problem solving to actually framing questions. So there's an entire course on how we can break down the components of artificially intelligent powered cyber-physical systems. What are they? What are the kinds of questions that we need to ask about them, and how can we create critical thinkers who are able to take this toolkit into the world? And in fact, that's the second part of the strand around cyber-physical systems praxis and leadership, is how do we take that toolkit of questions and the 3AI framework to be able to explore, understand a range of systems. And indeed, the climax of the program that some of our students have already gone through is the capstone project. And so for this year, we're going to start thinking about what those capstone programs can be for each of our students really early. So if any of you here would like to take on a student, please get in quickly. We only have hopefully 18 of them, so do let us know. You can either email myself, Maya, or go onto the website and log a request, and our students will look at that diligently. All right, and as Alex has mentioned, the other thing here is that we do want to release some of this to the world. So one of the first things we're going to be doing with the framing questions is to release every fortnight some of the resource lists so that you can read, watch and listen along with our students to the kinds of things that they're learning about. So this is the second year of stabilising our curriculum, and we're going to give ourselves at least one more year to perfect this prototype. So if you want to get in for finally helping us design the rest of the curriculum, please apply this year. There may not be another one, another chance. 2021, again, go onto our website, sign up to our mailing list, and we'll let you know when you can apply. Now, ultimately, this new branch of engineering will really need a set of professional standards, and this is to allow us to translate this particular branch of engineering to other universities, research labs and graduate programs around the world. And to this end, we've commenced discussions with Engineers Australia around how we can embed and and recognise this new branch of engineering. And this work is really going to be critical for us to scale globally. And our mission in doing this is really to create a whole international generation of practitioners who never say, you know, that's not my job to think about, I'm just an engineer. But rather, oh, if I can build that, should I build that? So we're really trying to get our new practitioners to be able to make this world a better place, something that obviously we share with so many of our sponsors and other organisations. It's not something different. But the place that we're doing that is where technology is being designed, built, managed, scaled, regulated and decommissioned. And ensuring that the people who are able to do all of that represent all parts of society, and that those people are equipped with the right tools to make the really big decisions about our future, our collective future. And so we thought we couldn't finish up without formally introducing you to our new cohort of students. Now, we did this last year too, as those of you who are present would recall, although we're not quite as cruel this year as we did give them a bit of a heads up. Sorry, 2019 cohort. So if I can ask all of our 2020 cohort to stand up collectively, I would like each of you individually to go around the room and give us, to describe yourselves in 3 words. So if you can start.
All right, so test. How many of you know the phrase, and just one more thing? Those of you who are laughing in the room know that was always Steve Jobs' trademark. And Steve always said it after he'd announced everything you could possibly think of. He would stand on stage and he'd go, oh yeah, there's just one more thing. In my case, actually, there are just 2 more things. Because, you can always improve on the original. The first one is there are 2 students who are still missing. So let us keep in our minds that at some point I hope to hear both Eric's voice and Memonet's voice, and that we will hear from them 6 more words. And so imagine the tapestry you just heard gets infinitely more delightfully, wonderfully complicated. And I hope you have the same moment I do when I listen to all of those voices and all of those words and think, okay, 2019 was something, 2020 is going to be something else. And I will take Rachel at her word that the second child has an edge. I'm a first child, so I don't believe that. I'm very clear about where I sit in that story. But one more thing. So I said that it was the 100th anniversary of a play, and that play is Rossum's Universal Robots. That play was authored by a Czech playwright, Karel Čapek. It was released to the world in February 2020 on a stage in Budapest. And how a play got from there to New York and London and Sydney and Tokyo before the internet and before memes is a miracle of translation, adaptation, and a message that resonated. And I thought, well, the thing about that play is it might have been 100 years ago, but there are themes in that play that still feel remarkably contemporary. And through the 1960s, that play was performed a great deal all over the world. It was performed in schools, it was performed in community theatres, and I think part of its persistence was that it tells a story of a factory that makes robots and of robotic objects doing the work of humans, and of notions about labour and work and money, and ideas about what it means for humans to make technologies that feel like they might replace and substitute us, and about all the anxieties that it creates. It's a play that for those of us in the room who read it last year and who've been reading it again this year found it remarkably resonant. And so we thought, well, hell, it's 100 years, we should put it on. And so on April 2nd, I hope at Questacon in the evening, and I hope you will all be there, a couple of my amazing colleagues up the back of the room, Charlotte, I am looking at you, and Ellen, I am looking at you, have been adapting the play, an interpretation of the play, if you will. We have cut it down a little bit. Turns out the thing about the 21st century is we just don't have the attention span of the 20th century, and a full parlour room drama just ain't going to cut it. So we've shortened it a little bit. We have taken the liberty of adding some characters to the play who clearly should have been there. We've written the playwright in, because obviously Čapek had a point of view that was obvious in 1920 that clearly needs to be back. I have taken the liberty of thinking that we might need to add me in. I am, because I was going to have a Norbert moment. We've added Norbert in to counterbalance me, and then we've added Mary Shelley because, well, how can you talk about monsters without having Mary there too? So, you will be joining us April 2nd. There will be a reading of our adaptation. I hope that will be an interesting intervention. I'd like it to be a gift. I'd try to think about what are the things we can do to intervene in the conversations that go on around us and find different ways to have conversations. For me, this play is a constant memory that the idea that our relationship to technology is one that is sometimes characterized by fear and sometimes characterized by optimism isn't new. It, in fact, has a literary history, not just a technical one. And so, April 2nd, premiere in Australia of RUR. First time, as far as I can tell, since the 1930s. So, be there or, well, be square, basically. Be there or don't, but I think you should be there. So, the way you will know about it, it will come out on our newsletter. So if you were signed up for that, that is great. If you were still complaining about the fact that on our newsletter there is a button that asks you if you were a robot, get over it. I'm trying to work out how to get a cookie in there, but we will at some point. In the meantime, sign up to the newsletter. News about the play will be out. We will all be there. We hope you will be there too. And that gets us to the end of all of this. My job at the very end is to say 3 more things. There is food at the back. You are at tables. All of those tables have amazing people at those tables. You should meet those amazing people. Please talk to our students, talk to our staff, talk to each other. And remember that the thing about the 3A and the thing about the journey we are on is that I don't want to do it alone, and I don't think anyone in the Institute does. So you are all here because you are friends and family, and you are on that journey with us, whether you like it or not. You can try and leave and go to graduate school in another country, but it won't work. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for all of your incredible engagement with us. I will take Rachel's point. It wasn't a sponsorship, it was a relationship. So I thank you for that too. And I just want to go, oh my God, 2020, yay, let's go. Right.